Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Mem Beis Amud Beis, starting with Daf Mem Beis Amud Aleph at the new parak, the third parak. Our Mishnah opens up the parak by speaking about a list of those items that are chametz, but are more mekil than the typical chametz. And therefore, if a person were to eat such chametz, he would not be chayiv kares. Yet he has to destroy, he has to get rid of this chametz on Pesach. Says the Mishnah, Ve'elu oivrin ba Pesach, and these are those that must get rid of on Pesach. If one does not do so, he's chayiv. He's oiver bal yeroah and bal yematzei. And the first of the list are those that are chametz, that are taroives chametz. They are chametz gamor mixed with non-chametz. Kutach ha-bavli v'sheichar ha-madi v'choymetz ha-adoimi v'zeisoim ha-mitzri. The first one is Kutach ha-bavli, which we had mentioned before more than once. This is a dip that was made with bread pieces that were spoiled bread and milk and salt, that you would use it as a dip. The sheichar hamadi, this is sheichar beer. Typically they would make beer with tamarim, with dates. This beer also included that which comes from the barley, as we have it. V'choymetz ha-adoimi, the red wine of adoimi was put barley inside to make it into vinegar. V'zeisum ha-mitzri, the zeisum ha-mitzri was a concoction which had a barley flour inside of it, was used really as a medicine. So that first list is called taroives chametz. The second of the list is called chametz nuksha. It's an inferior type of chametz. It doesn't ferment properly, and these are the following: v'zoiman shel tzvoim. This is that which is made in order then to make it so that you would have dye, to make dye for a certain type of leather. Va'amilon shel tabochim. They would put this together inside of the pot in order to then take away that froth, the zuhama. V'koilan shel soifrim, and the glue of the soifrim. These again are called chametz nuksha, an inferior type of chametz, and they too you must get rid of. If not, you're over bal yeroi ba yematzei. Rabbi Eliezer oimer af tachshite noshim, even the cosmetics of women, that also, and he's coming to argue on the Tanakama because the Tanakama spoke about two lists: taroives chametz and chametz nuksha. Rabbi Eliezer says even if it's going to be chametz nuksha, which is a taroives, that itself would be something you have to get rid of. And he goes on to say, Zaklal, this is the principle. Kol shehu mimin dogan harei ze oiver bepesach. All of the items that come from the 5 different types of grain: wheat, barley, spelt, oats, and rye. If a person has any item that is made from this that becomes chametz, even if it's going to be not only taroives chametz, not only chametz nuksha, but even a mixture of chametz nuksha, a mixture of the two. Harei elu ba'azhara, he's going to be chayiv as an azhara. That means he's going to be chayiv malchus as a lav. Ve'ein bohem mishum kares, but if he eats, he's not going to be chayiv kares. The Gemara begins with a brayse Tanu Rabbanan regarding the first item of kutach ha-bavli. Shloisha dvarim ne'amorim bekutach ha-bavli. There are 3 things that were stated in regard to kutach ha-bavli. Metamtam es halev, it stops up, it causes a stopping of the heart. Mesame es ha'inayim, it causes one to be blinded. Umachish es haguf, and it also causes a person to become weakened. Metamtam es halev, a blockage of the heart. Mishum nisyoy veich dechalava, because of the separation when you put the milk and you make it into the, you make cheese from it, the watery milk that comes out from it, that's negative and causes a blockage of the heart. Mesames einayim, why? Mishum milcha, because of the salt that's put into the kutach ha-bavli. That salt is the salt that is very, very strong. It's called salt that is melach doimis, whereby when you dip your item, whatever you're dipping inside the Kutach habavli, you might have some on your fingers whereby you touch and rub your eyes. It can cause a blinding effect. Umachish is a goof. It also causes one's body to become weakened. Mishum kumnisa du'uma, because of the mold of the bread. So these are three things that are a result of eating the kutach habav that can become a very negative, dangerous type of thing for one's goof. Toner Rabban, the Gemara brings another brayse, Gimel Dvorim Marbin HaZevel. There are three things that increase zevel in a person. The koifefin es hakoima, also a form of weakening a person. V'noitlin echad mechamesh meyois mimor einav shel odam. It also causes a person's eyes to become dimmed. Eluhain, and these are them. Pas kibar, coarse bread. V'sheicha chadosh, and wine, not wine, beer rather, that is fresh. V'yerek chai, and raw vegetables specifically, Rashi explains, these are if you eat a lot of onions, leeks, and radishes, they have this negative effect where it causes a person to have marbe zevil. Toner Rabban, the Gemara now brings a brayse that says the three things that are opposite in the positive form. Shlosh dvarim ma'atin es hazevel. V'zoikfin es hakoima. They also strengthen a person. U'me'irin es ha'inayim. And they also help a person's eyesight. Eluhain, pas nekiya, a refined type of bread. Bosar shomen, bosar, that is fatty type of meat. V'yayin yosham, and old wine. Pas nekiya, the Gemara goes through each one. Pas nekiya, refined bread. On top of mem beis amud beis. The samida, because it's refined flour. Basar shamin, we're talking about fatty meat. Specifically, the Gemara explains that spirasa deloy aftach. It's talking about the female goat that has not yet given birth. Yayin yashon, atik atike. It's a 3-year-old type of wine. Komi dimali lahai kosher lahai. With the kosher lahai, mali lahai. Each one of these things, however, if they're going to be beneficial for one aspect, if a person will take, not these three things, but in general, all things that you will then benefit the body in one way will have deleterious effect in another way. And vice versa, something that's negative in one way might be positive in another way. However, bar mi zanjavila, except for zanjavila retiva, which is fresh type of ginger, upilpil arichta, and a long pepper, upas nekiya, and refined bread, ubasar shamin, and fatty meat, v'yayin yashin, and old wine. These are in the list that we mentioned before. Demali lekule gufe. These are beneficial for the entire body, and they don't have the negative side effects. Sheikha Hamodi, the next thing on the list of the Tyra of Chometz is Sheikha Hamodi. Says the Gemara, Deramu Bei Meisar. They add a little bit of the water that's soaked from the barley. In other words, not only coming from the dates that is typically made with for beer, but also the barley that produces this beer, and therefore making it to Tyra of Chometz. And that's why it's referred to the Sheikha Hamodi, because in Modai they had such beer. All other places they made their beer with just tamarim, with dates. The next thing on the list of Tarav Chametz is Chometz Ha'adoimi, the vinegar of Adoimi. Says the Gemara, Deshadu Bei Sa'are. This was wine that would not become vinegar because it was a strong, good quality wine. So they would have to put barley inside to then cause it to then ferment and make it into vinegar. Omar Rav Nachman explained, Betchila kishayu mevin nesachim miYehuda. In the beginning, when they would bring, in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, for the wine libations, they would use the wine from Yehuda and bring it to the Beis Hamikdash for the wine libations. Lo haya yenam shel Yehuda machmitz. The wine was so good that it would not become vinegar. Ad shenoistin letoichen se'orin. Until they would actually add barley, then it would cause it to become vinegar. Without doing such wine would not become vinegar. It was such a strong, high quality wine. V'achshav, Rav Nachman goes on to say, but now, once there's no Beis HaMikdash, ein yenim shel adoimi machmitz, ad shenoisim l'toichen sa'orim, v'koin nosan choymitz adoimi. Nowadays, after the Churban Beis HaMikdash, it's the wine of the Edomites that is good quality wine, and it only becomes vinegar when you add barley. This comes to then fulfill that which is stated in the pasuk. Imola hacharova, I will fill up the part that is charova, in a state of desolation, referring to the desolation of Yerushalayim, of Beis HaMikdash. Then it was filled up with the antithesis, with Rome. Mola zu charava zu, imola zu charava zu. When this one is at its peak, namely Yerushalayim, Klal Yisrael, then this one, Edom, is at its bottom. And vice versa, imola zu charav zu. If this one's filled up, then the other one is at a state of chareva, of desolation. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Omar Mehalcha, he brings a different pasuk to explain the same truism. And this monarchy, this kingship, will then be strengthened over the other kingship. In other words, again, when Rome is at its peak, then Klal Yisrael will be then down below. And when Klal Yisrael is on top, then Rome will be down below. Tanya Omar Rabbi Yehuda, the Brisa states, name Rabbi Yehuda, Bi Yehuda Barishoina Halokeach Choymetz Me'am Haaretz Eino Tzorich La'aser B'mnei Shechazaka Ein Boy Ella Min HaTemed. Initially, that means before the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, in Yehuda, if a person were to take Choymetz from an Am Haaretz, normally when one buys grain from an Am Haaretz, so he's suspect that the Am Haaretz did not take the proper maestros out. So it's called Demai, and therefore he himself must then be mafrish maestros. But before the Churban Mikdash, and one would buy Choymetz from an Am Haaretz, vinegar from an Am Haaretz, so then he has a chazaka that indeed doesn't take up meiser, because he has a chazaka that indeed it was coming from temed. What is temed? Temed is once the grapes have been pressed, so now the leftovers, that means the seeds and the peels, is soaked in water. That's called temed. And therefore, the vinegar would be produced from the temed. In other words, the wine, again, as we said before, by the time before the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, that wine was very strong, and therefore would not produce any vinegar. The vinegar that was produced was only from the temed, whereby you didn't have to take the maestros from the temed of an Am Haaretz, because there was not chayiv in maestros, presumably because it was just taken from the water of the temed. It didn't have any of the wine in it. And now, however, after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, halokeyach choymetz mi Am Haaretz, one would buy vinegar from an Am Haaretz, tzorich la'aser, he would have to take meiser out, because it's demai. Shechazakoso eino ba'ela min hayayin, because over here we have to assume that it came from yayin. In other words, now after the Churban Beis HaMikdash, they would take the vinegar from the wine itself, which was a lesser quality wine, that the wine itself became vinegar. V'sover Rabbi Yehuda asked the Gemara, Temed la bar asurehu. The Gemara challenges and asks, does Rabbi Yehuda say that one does not have to take meiser from Temed? Now, as we said before, in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, before the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, since they only made vinegar from Temed, therefore you would not have to then take out then meisters from the Am Haaretz, because after all, it's only from Temed. It's mashma that Rabbi Yehuda holds if it's from Temed, you don't have to take meisters. Here we see, ask the Gemara, we do see that he requires meister from Temed. V'Tanya, it states, Hamasamed v'nosen mayim b'midah, one who makes Temed and takes a certain amount, a measurement of water, umotza kedei midasoy, and then he finds, after taking out that Temed, soaking it with the peels and the seeds of the grape, he finds the same exact measurement of liquid, of water. It's potter. Rabbi Yehuda mechayiv, nonetheless Rabbi Yehuda is chayiv. Why? Because of the sight and the taste, in other words, the coloring and the taste, are mechayiv, Rabbi Yehuda says, to make maasros. So why did he say before that you are not chayiv? Answers the Gemara, Hachi Ka'amar, Lo necheshedu am ha'aretz al hatemed. What he said before was, you don't have to be choishin and am ha'aretz from temed. Normally, you would have to take out maasros, but the am ha'aretz took out maasros. Why? Because since there's not a great loss to the am ha'aretz, he doesn't have a vested interest not to take out maasros, and therefore he can rely on the am ha'aretz that he did take out maasros from the temed. Ibois emo nechshedu. Or alternatively, you can say that indeed the am ha'aretz is nechshad. If that's the case, then why did Rabbi Yehuda say you don't have to take out then the maasros? V'lo kasha, because ha b'deravka v'ha b'defutzanei. B'deravka is referring to the Mishnah. There it's talking about when they took out the temed and there was still shmorim from the water, which means that there was some yayin, some juice that was still inside mixed with the water. That's mechayiv and meiser. Whereas that which he said before is talking about where it didn't have any of the juice whatsoever, and therefore was only flavored by the seeds and the peels of the grapes, whereby it was only flavored water, and therefore you don't have to take out meisers. The next on the list in the Mishnah is Zeisom HaMitzri. Ask the Gemara, what's Zeisom HaMitzri? Ma Zeisom HaMitzri? Tano Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef taught, it is Tlosa Sa'ari, it has a third of barley, Tlosa Kurtumi, a third of saffron, V'Tlasa Milcha, and a third of salt. Rav Papa Mafik Sa'are Umay Lichuti. Rav Papa, he said instead of putting the third of sa'arim of barley, you put a third of wheat. The Gemara says, V'simonach sisni. And the way to remember who said what is that Rav Yosef, who has the samech in his name, the sin sound, he said sa'arim. And therefore sasni has two sins. Sisoni. And that's how you can remember, that's a mnemonic to remember that it's Rav Yosef who said it's the sa'arim, and it was Rav Papa who said with chitim, with wheat. The Gemara says, Taru luhu, how did you prepare this? Taru luhu, first of all, you would soak it, v'kol luhu, and you would then roast it, v'tachnu luhu, and then you would grind it, v'shosilu medivta v'ad atzarta, and then you would drink it from the time between Pesach and Atzeres and Shavuos. The kamit merafi lei, when one had constipation, it would then soften his bowel movements. V'rod udrofi mekatmi lei, and vice versa. L'choyle leisha ubro sakanta. The Gemara points out, however, a person who was ill or a woman who just gave birth, they should not take such a potion because it will cause too much of a laxative. The Gemara now turns to the latter part of the list in our Mishnah, which are now a list of chametz nuksha. Again, chametz nuksha is an inferior type of chametz. It didn't develop properly, ferment entirely, and therefore it has a din of chametz nuksha, which again, if one were to eat it, he would not be chayiv kares. Says the Gemara, Zoyman shel tzivoim, Hocha targimu, Maya dechivri, detzivi behu labo. This is the Maya dechivra, this is soaked in bran, and it is used for paint, to paint a red type of paint for the ore of an animal. Va'amelon shel tabochim, the next on the list, pas tevua. This is tevua shelo hivia shlish. This is the grain that did not grow a third, so it's premature, didn't grow properly. Sheminich al pi kedeira v'shoeves hazuhama. They would put this on the top of a pot, and it would draw out all of the zuhama that is coming out from that pot. V'kolen shasoifrim, the third and final one on the list is kolen shel sofrim, the glue of sofrim. The Gemara says, Hacha torguma perua de ushpechi. It's actually, the Gemara says, This is the perura, the ishchafi. This is the glue of the shoemaker. Rav Simi mechozno omar zet tipulin shel benois ashirin. He argues and says this is the tipulin. This is what the wealthy girls you would use in order to remove the hair from their skin. They would then, after using it, leave it over for the poorer girls to use for themselves. Eini asked the Gemara, is this so? V'hotana Rabbi Chia, arbo mine medina v'shlosha mine umnus. He thought that our Mishnah, which brings a list of 7, the first 4, which says taruvas chametz, is a list of 4 that are mine medina, that are applicable to all of the Medina, all types of people. Whereas the last 3 that are a list of chametz nuksha are 3 that are specific to an uman, to a craftsman. So he's asking, tipulin shel benois ashirim, my mine umnus ika. Why is that an umnus? That which should fit in the category of a Medina. And yet the last 3 of the chametz nuksha are listed as those things that are umnim, that craftsmen use. Ve'elamai, asked the Gemara, perui de ushchefi, you're going to say that's the glue of a shoemaker? Asked the Gemara, amai karu leid hai kulan shel soifrim. If that's the case, why should it be called the glue of sofrim? Kulan shel ratzonim boile. It should say the glue of the shoemakers, and not the glue of the soifrim. Amrav Oshaya lo'olam peru de ushchefi. Really, it is the glue of the shoemakers. So why is it called the kolin, the glue of the soifrim? The soifrim nami midbekin behu nayarosehen, because those scribes would also take glue in order to then take the glue and make their papers, in order to make the papers that they can write on. And therefore that's the name that's given to the glue of the soifrim, which is indeed one of the things that are considered to be chametz nuksha, and that also you have to get rid of on Pesach.